to speak to an audience, and I don't really know what they do. Like, so I would appreciate, anyway, if people could give me a show of hands of, like, are you currently a software developer? Okay, all right, cool. So I can talk about code things, and I won't lose everybody. That's good. But at the same time, I probably won't talk deeply about code things, because I was kind of thinking, are there people who are not really software developers but are interested in software craftsmanship? It's one person. Okay, and there's some people in the middle, I think. Okay. So when I was invited to speak at this conference, I was thinking, what can I talk about? And my most recent experience had been at another company other than the one I work now. And so I thought that would be a good story to tell you. So once upon a time, I worked at Makers Academy. Actually, this is not really very long ago. I started there less than a year ago, and I left in January, February. However, I wanted to, it's kind of an interesting experience. I was trying to get back into technical roles, and currently I'm working as a JavaScript software developer, but they were looking for people to work with their Ruby code base, Ruby on Rails. And they were willing to take a leap of faith and hire somebody who didn't know any Ruby or Rails, but who had more software engineering experience. So I was hired for the fact that I wouldn't go to town and develop loads of features that were just because I loved Ruby, but would talk to the business and try and figure out what we should actually build. So they had not had any software developers working there for a while. They were a small startup. They're a coding bootcamp, very well-respected coding bootcamp in London. And they had software that was written by the coaches that coach on the training course. And they realized that this is kind of a bit of a problem, because you've got people who are coaching students to be software developers, and they're not really continuously available to maintain the software systems that underpin the business. And once you are a serious business and you're making a fair bit of money, you want to not rely on all these kind of homemade systems. So I was trying to help them wean their way off their kind of all their homegrown software that was built by people who'd either been coaching the course or just come off the course and were kind of quite new to being software developers. So I mentioned legacy code. I know there are different definitions of legacy code around. I am going to use the definition of legacy code is code that's written by someone who's no longer around. So the last developer that they were actually paying to be a developer had left 6 months before I joined. So there were no other developers there. There were the coaches who were working on the training course, and me. Now, some people use the definition, oh yeah, legacy code is code without tests. Now this code had tests, fantastic. It had a CI system, good infrastructure, seemed like it was in good shape. However, I quickly learned that actually sometimes you could make changes, all the tests would pass, it would all seem fine. However, things would be broken. So although there were all those tests, they were the kind of tests where they would pass and things were still not, but the actual system wouldn't work. So, for example, as I was kind of trawling through the code base, they were making some calls to an API. And what they were trying to do was kind of reconcile between somebody's profile on GitHub and somebody's profile in their CRM system. So but of course, different people may not have filled in their email address or their country or their location, some parameter in their GitHub profile, which they wanted to look them up by and fill in their CRM. So what they were doing, they had all these calls which would go, look up this person by email, and they would still make the call to the external API even if it was an empty string. And you're like, why are you going? You're looking for a person, you're sending an API call to something when you know that you don't have the email. I thought, well, let's stop doing that. But actually it turned out they were relying on exceptions being thrown, and the fall-through logic was all in the exception handling. And all tests still passed. Everything was saying, oh yeah, it's fine. But if you didn't make a call to look somebody up on their email, even when you didn't have it, it wouldn't then step through to the next things. So that's the kind of thing that I was finding as I was going through the code base. But I'm not just going to, and I'm not here to complain about the code, because I understand, the people who were building it were under pressure when they were building it and short of time, and that usually leads to quality issues. So, although it seemed wonderful, there's all this nice CI and there's tests and the tests run and you can deploy things, the reality is there was a lot of code that was either in a poor shape or not being used. Like people had written a thing which nobody ever used, or there was something that everybody relied on and it wasn't being maintained. So I had to try and sift through things and try and figure this out. So this talk is really trying to talk about some of the techniques I use for that, and also techniques for talking to people in the business. So I have a whiteboard in my home office, and this is my whiteboard, which I carried out to the garage and stuck there and kind of tried to figure out what is in this system, who are all these people, what things do I need to know about, and just, I'm not expecting you to be able to read the writing, but basically there were a bunch of users, different kinds of users. So you've got people who are interested in taking a course, you've got people on the course, people who have looking for jobs after they finish the course, and people who are actually hired alumni. And then in the green, you've got these other bunches of people. You've got an onboarding team. They're all about trying to get people in on the course, and a careers team, and they're all about getting people jobs afterwards. And in the middle, you've got some coaches, and the only technical people at the company are really the coaches. Everybody else, people who work in the onboarding team and people who work in the careers team, they kind of have vague notions about what software engineers do, but they don't really know. So, and they were using CRM, and they were using GitHub and Slack. And those are the things that they were using day to day. And then there were these little bits of Ruby, Sinatra, Rails projects, kind of gluing pieces of things together, and a database at the back. And then all these post-its at the bottom were things that also pump data in and out of the system. Things like that we were using Go Cardless for payments, we were using Typeform for employers to fill in jobs. So there was a bunch of stuff. I tried to do a data model. I used Rails ERD. I don't know if anyone else has tried using this. What can you tell about this data model? Can you tell anything? Imagine if there's one big object called student, and everything else, pretty much student has a lot of attributes, or it has some attributes which have been moved into other tables. But what there wasn't any concept of was different kinds of users, and also people going through phases. So the idea that you would go from being applying, being on the course, and then looking for jobs. So there was quite a lot of work to do just to get this into a fit state to, if I could just move back, I put some stuff in dotted lines which you probably can't read. They were going to move into doing an apprenticeship program, and they were also wanting to do like a contract perm model, and this would require the existing system to be extended. But they had kind of baked lots of things into student. So I went on a bit of a mission. I kind of went around talking to all the teams. What do you actually use? What do you think you're going to need in the next year? And then try and figure out like what licenses are we paying for and that kind of stuff. And I made lists of this. And I thought maybe a good way would be to try and fix some bugs. And that would help me, rather than kind of just looking abstractly and thinking, there's all this code, what does it do? So this is a tip I would say, try and fix some bugs. If there are things that people say are not working, start fixing them. It's like pulling on a little bit of string and then finding out what's going on in the system. So this is a screenshot of, I think, the first bug that I fixed, and actually it's not showing it in the bug state. But what would happen is you'd enter your phone number when you were applying to go on the course, and it would show the wrong flag for the wrong country that you were not in. And this was kind of, so my first thing was, oh, well, let's not show the flag at all. We don't need to show a flag. That's just purely kind of a silly thing to do. You know what country you're in. Why do you need a flag? So but it's especially annoying if you have the wrong flag, and it's different colours even in your home flag. But then when I took a look into the code and looked a little bit more deeply, I started to see kind of what a hornet's nest the code was, because it was doing all sorts of things like it was trying to work out what country you were in from your IP address, and that lookup was not working properly, and it was storing your longitude and latitude into the model against the students. And it's like, well, given that we're a coding school in London and we're mainly about students who can get to London in our one office, and we find them jobs in London or maybe a little way away from London, this is overkill. We do not need to know the longitude and latitude of the students. We do not need to display the flag. Eventually, they pressured me to put the flag back in. There was a long period where there was no flag, but nearly always the solution to the bugs was to delete code or some deluded idea of what, I don't know, what the code should do. Meanwhile, pressure was mounting from the business. They were saying, oh, look, I want this, and I want this, and I thought you were going to, we've hired a developer, I want things now. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with this show, The IT Crowd. It's a British comedy show. Yeah, and anyway, so this is Moss, the main character. And there's a fire in the office, and then there's some more fire, so he just clusters the fire together. So, that's what I did. Let's get all these tickets, let's try and move them into different columns and sift through them and try and figure out, what's actually important or not important. Because people are very keen to have the thing that is stopping them or holding them back from the next thing that they want to do. So obviously, you can't just say no in a horrible way. You have to kind of do this gently and nicely so that people will kind of listen to you and, understand. Because they were saying, look, there's lots of work to do. Hire more developers. We need an engineering team. We've hired you as a lead engineer. We want you to hire people. And I'm going, I don't think it would be a good idea. And they were saying, well, why don't you take some people who just finished the course? They would be great. And I was saying, I know it'd be even worse to have people who've literally just graduated from a course and then put them on this code base. So I was trying to say no and convince them that actually, they've got a CRM. Actually use more of the features in that CRM and try to build less of our code. So it's difficult talking to business people. And when I say business people, it makes them sound like they're all in suits, and they're not. These were lovely people who were doing yoga and meditation, and they were really nice, but they didn't have much of a clue about what software is really, even though they were working in a coding school and getting jobs for people to be coders, because a lot of people don't understand. It's not like you ship a feature and then it's done and then you ship the next. It's not like Lego bricks. It's much more like you have a car that you're made, imagine you buy a car and you have to take it in for servicing. You have to top up the levels of oil and gas, and it's not a thing where you go, all right, we've got this thing. You just can't just keep bolting things onto it without it slowing down. So really, I had to use lots of different analogies of, what is software like and why can't we do this? And then the other technique I used was actually to dig around in the system and build message sequences to try and say, look, this is what is going on when somebody applies for the course, they get their place approved, and we ask them for payment. Because one of the challenges I had was that the payment service we were using, the API that we were using was being deprecated. So they were saying to us, you have to get off this API you're using by October, and that the new API didn't support the features that we were currently using. So it meant that we would have to introduce new features or move to manual reconciliation. And I tried sitting down with the head of finance and actually explaining all of the little fragile pieces that were in our system. And I persuaded him that actually it was better to go to manual reconciliation than introduce more screens for a user to go through. And so these message sequences were actually helping me to explain this is the complicated thing that is going on behind the scenes. And we can make it more complicated, and that might be the right thing to do if we move to a product which does things in a different way, but the product that they had settled on for budget reasons was something that would require quite a different approach, and you'd have to fill a lot more fields in, and then have more asynchronous approvals. And so basically, I persuaded them through the use of modeling not to invest more in this particular part of the system. So I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes models can be your friend because they can at least explain to a non-technical person what's going on and behind the scenes. The sunk cost fallacy is that, we've spent money on this thing, we've invested many years developing this thing, so now it's an asset and we need to keep it. So sometimes that's not sensible thinking. Yes, you spent time and you got value, and now it's time to trade your old car in and get a new one. Or, now you've built a mode of transport. You had a donkey and a cart. You used them successfully to get stuff to the market, but now you need to invest in a standard vehicle that's off the shelf and people know how to service. So I did a little bit of discussing with people about, do you really need your home-crafted software for the website? Because one of the activities I needed to do, as the only developer there, was to review. Every time people wanted to make a content change to the website, they would have to edit YAML files and make pull requests. And these were just literally for text changes. And, maybe there's an alternative. Maybe people could use content management system or something a little bit easier that didn't require having a code review pushing things to live. So I had to talk a little bit about, is this system that you're using now fit for purpose in your current situation? Just so that this is still part of the saying no nicely, by the way. So that's kind of one of the things that I tried to do. So the other thing that I spent a bit of time with people is to try and understand, well, where is this organization going? What do you think the future needs are going to be? What are our KPIs? And thinking about what would be the best use of time. And just because some people are very good at shouting loudly and saying, build my new thing, does not mean that's the best use of engineering time. So working with the leadership team on the roadmap for engineering was a kind of core part. And one of the interesting things about that actually was I kept coming back to I don't think we should be investing more time in building our own software argument. So they would say, what's your hiring plan? And I would say, I'm still not planning to hire anyone because I still don't think this is a good thing to invest in. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not working there anymore, is because I decided it was time for me to move on. And I think this was what a lot of the software developers in the past who'd worked on the system had done, is they'd worked there 6 months, got some experience, and then moved on. But the interesting thing for the company was, being a small startup, they hadn't really got a roadmap for the company. So they were going, where is our roadmap for engineering? And at the same time, you're going, well, where's your roadmap for marketing? Where's your roadmap for finance? And those teams didn't have roadmaps, but they just felt that, because they had feature requests, I should have a roadmap to put them all in and a staffing plan to support all of the changes they wanted. But again, I kind of spent a lot of time working with the leadership team saying, I don't think that's where you should be going. This is kind of a bit of an aside. One of the things I did find was, when I looked in the code base, there would be branches in the code, in Git branches, that had been written quite a long time ago, but had quite a lot of effort it put in, several months. So there was like a chat service that was there, and there was also a workflow for people who were going through interview stages. And these were all kind of trying to build services that were either available in our CRM into the Rails application, or they were features which were built on an assumption which didn't prove to be true. So, for example, if you wanted employers to enter job specs for students to be able to apply for, you can't really expect for big organisations, like I'm working in the City of London where there's all these banks. You're not going to ask the HR teams in those banks to get a GitHub account so they can create a login so that they can create their job spec using that ID. You know, so that they built a lot of features around that kind of thing, but hadn't got to the solving the who is going to do this logging in. So, but there were some features that were lying in those branches that were absolutely vital and useful to people. So I also found a long branch where it said, oh, this is a job hunter's view. This is a view for all of the students who finished the course and are available and looking for work. Then the careers team did not have access to this, so I was able to merge that in, and then people were able to use it. But behind the scenes, I remember I showed you the model, didn't have any job hunter in it. And so I was able to make it live, but it also required thinking a lot about how could we improve that Rails model. And that, again, is something that it's hard to explain to the business. Well, actually, this is, yes, I've merged it in and it works, but it's not really in a maintainable state because it's all part student. So that was another aspect of working there. Now, I'm getting towards the end, and I'm probably finishing earlier than I should do. But one technique that I will always use when I join any company is to keep a log. And I don't mean like a wooden log like this lady. But I mean, it's good to keep a diary. What are you doing? What are the questions people are asking? Where is your time going? And I'd recommend doing this on a personal basis. Just make a little log where you know what you were doing, and actually it helps you to reflect upon and make sure that you haven't lost issues. And then the other thing is to actually publish an update to everybody, all the stakeholders, so they know where your time is going. Like this week, I've mainly been working with Oliver, the head of the finance team, to make sure that, you know, we'll be ready when they deprecate the Go Cardless API. And starting to have that kind of regular communication is something that, and just not saying, oh, look at the tickets. Because looking at the tickets, it takes a little bit of investment in time. I knew personally that there were a lot of tickets there. And I also knew that if I was asking everybody in the business to just remember to go and look at the tickets and then figure out what we were doing, that was not the best way for them to find out what we were really focusing on. So I tried to make sure that I was sharing in a way that they could access, this is what's going on, and inviting them on a regular basis to come and prioritize, or at least make a pitch for why we should work on their thing. But they soon understood, really, that we were trying to work on the most valuable things and not on the things that was a pet project that they'd kind of come up with and were hoping would be the future. So I'm coming to my summary now. And I guess, for me, it's a really important thing for everybody to appreciate is that, yes, we hire software engineers for technical skills. But it's also important that we appreciate that software engineers are stakeholders. They are maintaining assets, code assets, that have value and have a maintenance life cycle. And we need to make sure that we are a voice, that we don't just go, oh, I'll do the next ticket, and then the next ticket, and then the next ticket. We actually say, I don't think these tickets are advisable. So like, as if you took your car to the garage and you say, I want you to soup up this car, and they go, no, it's past its lifetime. You know, you need a new one. You know, just to realize that you, as a software engineer, should be helping people understand the value of their assets. And being clear that when people explain a business need, and they have a solution, and they've invested time in the solution, like they have an open source website and changes are made by editing YAML files, you can kind of say, yes, I know that's how you do that now, but there are other solutions for this problem, and maybe it would be better for us to research an alternative than to actually, keep adding features to the system that you already have. And lastly, and this is kind of down to the kind of Boy Scout rule type thing, you should always leave the code in better shape. So when you see things that are not being used anymore, like that longitude and latitude of the students, that's no longer in their model, and there's various other things that are no longer in their model because nobody was using them, and I could have just passed them by, but I tried to make sure that I was cleaning up the test that didn't work, or the test that kind of lied, basically, and appeared to be testing scenarios that they were not testing. So trying to leave the code in better shape. So at least for the next people who come along, there's something where they can get their head around what's going on, why does this work this way, and how can we work with it. So my parting thoughts, so firstly, I don't want to diss the engineers who went before. You've always got to remember that people who write code that you don't think is the best didn't have the benefit probably of the experience or that you have, and also that they may have been under time pressure or that other kinds of pressure, social pressure, so that sometimes the code that you find, don't blame the person who wrote it. Don't think, oh, they were a terrible programmer. Just think that the context and the situation they were in may have been bad, and we should just let that go. So yes, this is crazy code, but and actually I even did go and find some of the developers who worked there before, who were working at another company, and I said, this piece that you wrote, this is not a good thing. But I didn't. That seems like going to extreme lengths, but I think it's important to not blame them, but also to say, did you know that this is what happened? Anyway, so with that, I'm going to close. Thank you for listening, and if you've got any questions, let me know.
You included a lot of stories and advice as the person coming in after the fact, looking at the legacy code, that give you any insight about the person writing the code initially to sort of, foreshadowing someone else coming in? Like, what are strategies that people could have done to make it easier for that next person?
Oh, yeah. So I nearly put some stuff in there, but I was worried I might have too many slides. But yeah, basically one thing. For instance, one of the last things I did before I left was they needed to have other types of application. So they used to have two types, the on-site course and the remote course. And then they stopped doing the remote course, but then they wanted to do apprenticeships and people who were kind of on a lock-in contract thing. So they were kind of going to be paid to do the course, but then they were going to work there afterwards. And they would need a different interviewing process. But the application form was really, really hard to change, because even though there were only two types when it was written, they'd kind of done all this string interpolation to make different kinds of classes. So my big advice would be, don't over-optimize. Don't kind of go, oh, I've got two different things, so now I know the whole about how, because that generalization that they'd done actually made it much harder to change the code. The other thing, and this is just reminding me of another thing, which is if somebody gives you a complaint and they say, this is slow, don't spend time, well, I guess it is important to put performance tests around it, but don't let that be your only thing. So actually try to understand why it's slow and use that as feedback on your design. So if somebody says, this is really slow, or it's really hard to edit. For example, there was some code which took the output from a type form to describe a job, and it put it all into one field in a database, a JSON blob. this was slow to extract fields out of, and also horrible to edit. So, and that was the only way you could just edit this raw JSON and try and find the little bit of the field, which the careers team did not enjoy doing. So, don't over-optimize and spend more time seeing your users using the software. So don't just kind of go, well, I've made a thing, does the thing that you want. Actually see it being used and see whether it's actually a usable thing for them.
Thank you.
Do you have any, were you able to convince your client to use more outside services that already exist? And do you have any tips for doing that if they know about those services and are like, that's not exactly what I need? Yeah.
So a big thing, I think, is to offer to be involved in helping them research alternatives. So, be there and say, yeah. So, for example, the head of the marketing team wanted to have a different solution for their website, and they found a particular solution. So I was able to kind of discuss how that might be used and to do some spikes to prove that it could be used. But in a way, the other tip is, if they can't get you to do the other thing because there's a backlog of other work, people will go and find creative solutions. But I think it's not good for non-technical people to choose a technical solution on their own without a technical person helping them to help them figure out what's an appropriate thing for them to use.
So I've found that status quo bias is really challenging on all sides of building software. The business might say, well, we've just always hand-edited YAML files to change copy on the website. The developers might say, well, we just always run the build again if that test fails. So I'm curious if you have advice or techniques for encouraging stakeholders to look beyond the world as it is now and see or imagine the world as it could be.
I think, showing them alternatives is literally going, hey, did you know you could just do this by filling a form in and not editing YAML? And actually, many of them know that. Like, our head of marketing had used more normal systems for editing website content beforehand. And then when she joined that company, that was kind of like, that's the only way. That's our way of doing it. I think there's a question from down here.
Testing.
Oh, hello.
Nice.
So it sounds like, there's sometimes a discordance between your role and the role of other business people who are pleasant and do yoga. But it seems like what's really beneficial is to have these kind of artifacts, these message sequences and the kind of mapping and things. I was wondering if you have any other specific examples of artifacts that you've discovered to help kind of state your case, like the log you were mentioning, but maybe some other things.
I think software is kind of invisible and a mystery to non-technical people. They're like, oh, so we just hear what the software is capable of doing, but we don't really understand how. So finding ways to visualize it, like this is how many files are involved, or, this is, how much time it might take, or just trying to have ways for people to see the size of a problem can sometimes be enough for them to kind of go, oh, I thought it was just easy. It's just if you think about, and then I use lots of analogies. So like if you kind of think, oh, well, if I take my car to the garage and I go, well, why can you not just fit this catalytic converter in an hour? And it's like, well, because we have to take the car up, put it like this, take all this stuff out, and just unpacking it a little bit and explaining what the work is. Even if there will be some technical terminology, people want to sort of understand that there is some rationale, or it's not that you're saying it can be done. I mean, basically, when people say, can you do this? It's always possible in software to build a thing. It's just, is it a wise and investment, basically? So it's kind of trying to help people to understand it. It's not, is it possible? But it's more like, should we be investing our money in this thing? Or maybe we could spend our money on this other thing. So kind of trying to kind of take it up into business value terms.
Hi.
Hi, this is Nidesh. Let me adjust the mic a little. As it was said in your introduction, you have been in industry for almost 30 years. And this is a little different question from, and it's more of an extension of what the previous person was asking.
Oh, yeah.
As a woman, have you faced like a challenge in some of those negotiations? That's part one of my question. And the second thing is, I mean, if I see in this room, right, it's the IT industry is a lot of, males in the industry. In our company, we have a huge initiative going on around women in IT. And a biggest challenge that we are finding is, the mentors and mentee relationship, right? I mean, did you have a mentor when you were, going in your journey? And it's a message you have for the women, because I want to take it back to the person who's leading that initiative in our company. And we see it as a challenge, and we're working towards that.
Okay, all right. So, yes, I'm a woman. And I haven't found it to be affecting my ability to write code. And because I'm an annoying person and I'm very confident in my opinions, I have not really found it an issue at all. And it's mainly been an advantage, because sometimes people will go, oh, we need more women. And so you go, oh, great. Okay, so I've got a job here. But I've never been treated badly or had a kind of a problem where I've thought this is all because I'm a woman. I was actually going into that job at the last place not knowing any Ruby, not knowing any Rails, because they valued my opinion. Now, whether they should value my opinion, I don't know, but they did. And I haven't had mentors in my life, really. I mean, I've been involved in the XP community in London for a long time, and there are people I know in that community, but it's sometimes they're mentoring me, and other times I'm mentoring. It's not like mentoring, it's more like talking to each other as peers. And they're mostly guys. My current team actually is the first team I've ever had where there are more women developers than men. This is like after 30 years, right? So we've got 3 women developers and 2 guys. That's kind of very, very rare. But it doesn't actually make any difference. I don't treat Barbara and Natalie any different than I would treat them if they were, guys, really. And I think that's the thing is, I think it is an issue, and it can be cultural to do with some countries. And so I have to say, I don't know what the situation in the US is like, but in the UK, it's more a case that women have been less interested, or be put off an early stage in getting into IT careers. But then I think now it's really changed, and I think now it's kind of leveling out. The place where I'm working at the moment, I am mentoring some of the women that work there, but I would be happy to mentor guys as well. It's not like a sort of a thing where I'm kind of feel like I just always see people as equal, and so I haven't really felt like it's something that I necessarily want to champion. Okay.
So we have time for just about one more question.
Thank you. At some point of the talk, you said that there were tests, but they were not very effective in preventing any regression, or sometimes it was giving you a false sense of security. I'd be interested to know how much of the testing strategy evolved as you went on and made changes to the code base of this application.
Well, so because I'm used to working in a test-driven way, I'm used to adding functionality when there is a failing test. So I would first make a test that failed before I added the behavior. And I think what I've realized, or what I learned, is I should try to do the same when I'm removing behavior. I just so innocently thought, this is a waste of time calling an API that when we don't have this value and it's an empty string. And I just didn't think it through, and I didn't think hang on a minute, is anything breaking? And the thing is, it didn't break in a very obvious way. It meant that profiles were not being synchronized through a set of waterfall parameters, and so it wasn't easy to see, that the effect wasn't easy to see. But certainly there was a kind of TDD style where there was either very, very neat unit tests, which were just totally encapsulating the little thing they were testing, and so didn't really test that it worked with anything else, or it was actually the tests that worked with the external API, where these were working against one message flow. So it was just like, so there was no test really for the whole waterfalling scenario. And I can't remember whether I added something, but I do try to add tests. And currently, I'm working in JavaScript and on front-end stuff, where people have kind of assumed, oh, you can't test UI. It's like, yes, you can. And then there were loads of things where we could write tests around, like there were validators that didn't have unit tests and things like this. And so I am a fan of unit test and acceptance test, but at the same time, people who are new, and I think we had people who'd kind of been on the coding bootcamp and then kind of been working on the code, they didn't have the exposure to think, what are the things that can go wrong? And nobody had really told them that, and I was more worried by the design thinking, of thinking some of the business logic happens through catching exceptions, which is, you don't ever want to be going, catch an exception, and now I do some business logic, and then, you don't want to expect those exceptions, I think, and make them part of your flow. So I think, but I did try and go to find the people who wrote the code and talk to them about those things. Anyway, okay, I'm finished, I think. Okay, thank you.